Day 914 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 607,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,190 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 11 APVs, 47 artillery, and 1 air defense system. But back to the artillery for a moment, which is truly a fascinating topic, as Russia continues to dig deep into the backlots of its artillery park. Take, for instance, this 1943 vintage Russian D1 152mm howitzer filmed by a Russian, which is built on an even older 1939 M30 howitzer carriage, shown in its camouflaged position, but also already damaged with the numerous shrapnel holes on the barrel. So this was the workhorse divisional artillery system for Soviet Russia back in World War II. But what on earth is Russia doing using this platform nearly a century later? And your first thought might be, how could these artillery platforms still be functional nearly 100 years later? Well, that's where a bit of nuance comes in. Because back in World War I and World War II, countries didn't measure their tank and artillery unit volumes in the tens of thousands, but instead they measured them in the hundreds of thousands. Even the post-World War II and early Cold War era Russian T-55 was a main battle tank that had a production run of well over 100,000 units. So this all means that if Russia can salvage even, say, 2 to 5% of their World War II artillery stockpiles, this would represent some notable figures. Even if these platforms are questionable from a personnel safety or an accuracy point of view, but the Russian MOD just doesn't care, as they will shamelessly use whatever is available. But do note, artillery, unlike tanks, have a lot less mechanical moving parts to them, which is why we've only ever seen a handful of T-55 tanks on the scene. But here's me still hoping to gain a glimpse of a fielded Russian T-34 tank someday soon. Then headed to the map as Ukrainian drones conducted a series of attacks targeting Russian military infrastructure near an airfield in Bataysk, located in the Rostov region. These strikes occurred overnight, with reports suggesting hits on or near military units and possibly an old and supposedly abandoned military airfield. And then on the map, and not too far away, where Rostov gets its name Rostov because the oil depot at Proletask is now running into its 8th day of a continuing blaze, all as a result of 2 separate Ukrainian UAV drone strikes, with the second incident occurring on the 4th day, leading to a cook-off continuation. Then moving along to take a look at the Cur Buffer Zone operations that are still in full swing by the AFU, with the Ulanok and the Malaya Lokhnya prison both fallen to Ukraine, which was already understood to be the case for the prison. Although the Russian ground forces reports always delay announcing the loss of a position, and of course, as expected on the flip side, always quick to claim a held position, or a victory, even if it doesn't exist. Now, just northwest of here, Ukraine is now in Durovka, putting Kremlin back in the vice, and so these positions inside of here were not in control of either army just a few days ago, since pushing all the way up to Alexandrovka. But as for Kremlin and Kalinov, geospatial analysis shows a significant increase in artillery scarring northwest of Kalinov, supporting the garrison in Kremlin, though of course neither army holds this grey zone position, with the notable use of artillery and counter-artillery fire in the works. And yet, the Ukrainian military actions have become so pervasive in this region that their activities have technically started to spill over to Russia's Belgorod region. Then headed to the Cauldron in the west, which is continuing to put a strain on the Russian army, because when they're not busy looting their own region, they are dealing with issues of logistical support without sufficient river crossing points. And so, like many or most collapsing army positions of the past, these types of events can occur unexpectedly and all of a sudden. Though usually after tireless efforts of the offensive forces, such as Ukrainian shaping operations, waiting for the perfect moment to take over a falling position, where I must have said at least half a dozen times on this channel before that the armed forces of Ukraine, through a combination of patience and lining up all of the right military elements, lying in wait before they make most of, if not all, of their biggest military offensive moves, including, of course, for Kursk itself. Meanwhile, an actual concerned Russian on the ground posted to their social media to have a bit of a whinge, which it could be best described as speaking on Ukraine's effective use of drones and HIMARS, and explaining that in order to prevent further Ukrainian incursions into the region, they require highly organized groups with all the necessary means at their disposal, from intelligence data on the ground to live reconnaissance footage from the air, but also that they need to reassign the Iskander missile firing crews to hunt down and destroy HIMARS platforms, a threat they also add was never neutralized in all this time of war. Interestingly, the Telegram stated that the HIMARS rockets are the second most effective means of isolating a combat area, for example by taking out pontoons or bridges, and second only to Ukrainian FPV drones due to their massive proliferation within the battlefield. The Telegram also went on to state that the Russian army shouldn't defend positions in strategically pointless settlements, fair enough, and to stop the meat waves of useless untrained soldiers, because they cannot hold positions at all, thus referring to conscripts in the area. But as for this Telegrammer's laundry list of recommendations for combat capabilities required to defend Russian positions, it really is a tall order, especially in the neglected north. Then to some specific events in this region, as we saw how the Ukrainian SOF, so the Special Operations Forces, destroyed Russian infantry fighting vehicles. Then we also impressively saw a Ukrainian missile strike on a Russian Zoopark counter-battery radar system worth roughly $10 million. Then having a look at some of the Russian military responses, as we see Russia expanding their fortifications deeper within the region, with a very dedicated focus on protecting the Kursk nuclear power plant. The building of new trench lines is one thing, but of course Russia requires the manpower to make them effective as well. So only time will tell if the combination of these two factors have sufficiently been enacted within their own military structures. Then as for further Russian responses, the Kremlin published this unusual video. It has no sound and all of the papers are blurred, as these two were claimed to be discussing the situation within Kursk, as Putin sits with the rarely cited Gerasimov, who, reports have it, he doesn't even trust. However, well, anyway, this footage was likely only submitted to feed to the masses internally. And maybe they were talking about this next response, because Russia also announced a recruitment wave in Kursk for the local Kursk unit, offering a 6-month contract, which we know means nothing these days. And the requirements are quite trivial, ages up to 65 years old, and for those who are, quote, able to perform the tasks. Although the rest of this offer is pretty much a flat-out lie. As it states, you'll get paid well, you'll be well supported, oh, and you'll undergo a professional fitness and psychological test. Now, those last parts are just completely inaccurate, given how we've seen Russia advertise at mental institutions and also Russians literally on crutches getting sent back on a second tour of the SMO. They are the gap plug-in army. Ooh, then also, in a rare few regions of Russia now, government employees are obligated to donate a day of their salary within their pay cycle for helping Kursk. And when you think about it, that's essentially austerity measures for those government employees. And it's quite obvious in hindsight that Russia would look to commence a program like this, as it takes back money paid to its own government employees for a budget that was squandered in this war. With the irony, of course, being that this example is at odds with Russia's messaging on the war going according to plan, and the exceptional economy not affected by sanctions. Then looking around the map, with locals burning a military building in Kazan, some 1,000 kilometers away from Ukraine. And this in fact happened quite a bit with military enlistment officers during the time of the Russian partial mobilization. So it would appear that we're seeing some extra expressed concerns about that possibility. Then looking elsewhere on the map in the Zaporizhia direction, as a Russian occupier made the right decision and surrendered after finding a leaflet with instructions. So after being duped into joining the army and traveling more than 1,000 miles from Russia's Astrakhan region, he then learned how Russian commanders were throwing their units into the meat grinder, and he just wasn't interested in participating. At least not anymore. Then right next door to the Kherson region, as Ukrainian Navy units destroyed a Russian ammunition depot and a 120mm mortar at the Kinburn Spit. Then headed southeast of here, as in another case of slightly damaged, the Russian Ministry of Transport claims that the targeted, destroyed, and sunk Russian ferry off the coast of Crimea in the port of Kavkaz from just a few days back was just temporarily out of service. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs when Russia cannot even admit to any defeat within their own internal structures for a war that depends on a bit of honesty to appropriately react to any situation and thereby put in place better defenses and redundancies in an attempt to prevent events from happening like this again. And it's not just isolated to this situation, it's almost a countrywide level of denial. Sure, it eases the pain in the short term a bit, but it only leads to longer-term fallout effects, effectively destroying the country from the inside out. Then taking a further look around the map, because somewhere in the east, Russian Telegram channels published a photo of an Mi-8 helicopter after a rough landing. The event just happened a couple of hours ago now, at an undisclosed location. Reportedly, the crew survived, but the helicopter won't be flying anytime soon. And according to reports, it was shot down by a drone. And as for some reference, the cost of such a helicopter can reach $14 million depending on modifications, equipment, and additional options. But we also have to take into account Russia's ability to produce or reproduce these things. And last I checked, by their own data, they were able to produce maybe 2 or 3 a year. Then also in the east, we saw the interception of another Russian Zala reconnaissance drone by an AFU drone operator. And then we also saw a Russian Orlan 30 reconnaissance UAV destroyed somewhere in the Luhansk region. And being that Luhansk is mostly Russian occupied, it clearly never got a chance to get far into Ukrainian held land, though possibly a mechanical failure. Then to take a bit of a late look at Ukraine's Independence Day yesterday, as a series of significant events unfolded, including the Ukrainian military intelligence launching a cyber attack on Russian industrial sites, causing widespread disruptions and compromising at least 70 terabytes of data. And then, in a symbolic gesture of defiance, 115 Ukrainian POWs returned home, singing the national anthem, underscoring ongoing back-channel negotiations between Russia and Ukraine despite public tensions. Meanwhile, international support was palpable as leaders from Poland and Lithuania stood with President Zelensky in Kyiv, reinforcing their solidarity. And amid the backdrop of all of these events, President Zelensky also praised the successful deployment of the Ukrainian-made Palyanitsa missiles, marking a significant step in Ukraine's defense capabilities. Now, little is still officially released about these so-called rocket drones, but what we do know so far is it's cost-effective, it's ground-launched, it's powered by a turbojet engine, and flies at speeds of up to 430 kilometers an hour. With an unspecified range, but was said to be capable of striking at least 24 Russian military airfields, which, if we look at the map, logically includes almost every single airfield of Russia's we can see right now. Then, oddly enough, for Independence Day, Iran decided to congratulate Ukrainians on their Independence Day. So, given their support for the supply of Shahed drones to Russia, it's simply just a very two-faced approach to geopolitical events. Then, oddly enough again, the man who authorized the use of his territory to invade Ukraine towards Kyiv as part of Russia's initial invasion, congratulated Ukraine on its Independence Day, with Belarusian President Lukashenko saying, quote, "The Belarusian land has always treated the warm-hearted and hard-working people of Ukraine with special respect and warmth. For a long time, our nations found strength in unity, shared joy and sorrow, shelter and bread, overcame adversity together, and were proud of their successes. We are united not only by a common destiny and family ties, but also by the desire to be friends and get along with our neighbors." I cannot even believe I'm reading that. Of course, hypocritical, ironic, and disingenuous. That's our crazy Luca. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and I really do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.